Welcome into episode 88 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
For years, law enforcement has wanted a way into locked iPhones. And now, it looks like they have it. GrayKey is a sort of black box that reportedly beats all the protections Apple has built into iOS to keep your data safe. The good news, not everybody can buy a GrayKey. That said, law enforcement agencies across the U.S. and maybe in other parts of the world are picking up these devices. Items on our list today: events that led up to GrayKey, where GrayKey came from, the basics of how it works, and finally, what's Apple doing about it? Now, I said before that not everybody can buy a GrayKey. GrayShift, the company that makes GrayKey, focuses exclusively on law enforcement agencies willing and able to pay the high price for the device. When you consider the company's apparently sitting on a massive security flaw, which has apparently gone unreported, the decision to focus on legitimate sales, as opposed to selling GrayKey on the black market, is an interesting one. But again, that's where we are today. Let's go back a bit and talk about how we got here.
Well, for that, we go back to December of 2015. The San Bernardino story is something we talked about before, partly because it shows the stark divide between Apple's desire to keep user data secure and law enforcement's desire to keep people secure. In the San Bernardino case, the government had an iPhone used by one of the shooters. Officials thought that the phone could contain information related to their investigation. When Apple refused to disable security features that would prevent brute forcing the password on the phone, the government took them to court. Though they dropped the case when the FBI found an undisclosed way to access the device. This kicked off or reignited an ongoing public debate about how to balance privacy and safety. Since 2015, Apple has kept introducing new features that, when implemented, should keep anyone but the device owners out of the device, keeping their information safe. We have covered a lot of those on past episodes of the checklist. What officials would like is some sort of backdoor into locked devices, a way in that would only work for the good guys. Of course, people who work in information security argue that a backdoor for the good guys is a backdoor for the bad guys too. For that reason, Apple and other companies haven't been interested in putting in the backdoor. While that argument continues, officials have had other tools to try to access to user information. Forensic software such as Elcomsoft's Phone Breaker is one example. Software like that doesn't do everything law enforcement would like, though, since it often requires fairly open access to the device in question. Getting through or around the password lock is tricky, especially because every time you put in the wrong password, iOS increases the amount of time before you could try again. Then there are companies like Cellebrite, which offer unlocking services to law enforcement as well as a lot of data extraction capabilities. Many think it was Cellebrite that eventually got the FBI into the phone of the San Bernardino shooter. One thing we do know, with millions of smartphones out there and an increasing focus on getting people to lock down their devices with strong passwords and encryption, the market for tools to break into phones has grown.
So that pretty much sets the stage for GrayKey. We know why it's out there, but where did it come from?
Physically, it's from Atlanta, but that's probably not what you're asking.
No, but it's a good bit of trivia. Thank you very much.
Yeah. GrayShift, the company that makes GrayKey, is based in Atlanta, Georgia. Founded in 2016, one of GrayShift's principals is a guy named David Miles. Miles is a cybersecurity professional with experience in phone breaking applications. And other research on GrayShift indicates that some of the people who work there actually also used to work for Apple. So obviously they would kind of know the security systems Apple has in place. Now, we said earlier that GrayShift is only selling GrayKey to law enforcement. If you go to their website, you'll be asked to enter a bit of information as well as a personal message explaining your interest in accessing information. And that's to help screen out people who shouldn't have access to such a device, basically limiting GrayKey's availability to legitimate law enforcement or forensic organizations. Other companies, such as Celebrate, aren't always as discerning about who they sell services to, but from what we know, GrayShift is serious about only working with the proper authorities. What we know about the device and the way it works comes from an anonymous source who leaked photos, descriptions, and other details of GrayKey's operation to security researchers at Malwarebytes. GrayShift offers its flagship GrayKey device in two formats. There's a restricted site-specific device at one price, and a less restrictive version as well. Now, the first option will cost law enforcement agencies $15,000, and it requires an internet connection to work, presumably to phone home to GrayShift servers to confirm some authentication data. The $15,000 unit is also geofenced, which means that it will never function anywhere except within the original network on which it was set up. So the idea here is that if a police department wants a GrayKey, they'll only be able to use that version within their own forensics lab. Now, there's the other option, which costs twice as much, but $30,000 will give the police the ability to forego the always-on internet connection and to unlock as many devices as necessary. I believe there is a limitation on the number of unlocks that you can do with the lower price, the $15,000 device. The $30,000 unit relies on a token to provide two-factor authentication to ensure the rightful law enforcement owner of the device is actually the one who's using it. And that's pretty much all we know, because all of the users who pay these fees are also having to sign pretty strict non-disclosure agreements as well.
Okay, so nobody's talking publicly about how it works, but do we have some idea of how it works?
Yeah, we have an educated guess, I guess. The device itself looks simple enough. It's just a small box with two short lightning cables poking out of it. Once activated, the authorities can connect one or two phones, basically that they need to access at the same time. And during that time, the internal software in the GrayKey device uses some sort of proprietary security exploit that they've discovered in the most current version of iOS. We do know that it works up to at least iOS 11.2.5 and likely continues to work even on 11.3. Because it's clearly a highly guarded secret, we have no way of knowing exactly what's going on. But based on the way the devices behave after disconnecting from the GrayKey, which normally only takes a couple minutes to prepare a device while connected, it's likely a deep and serious flaw that allows for a jailbreak-style root access to the iPhone, which is actually pretty scary. We've spoken before about jailbreaks and how on the gray market, those can be worth a lot of money to various people or institutions. And Apple does have their bug bounty program, and it doesn't pay out a whole lot in comparison for a jailbreak exploit. So whatever that the GrayKey device is actually dumping onto the iPhone, it is going to work at cracking the password. It's actually using the phone's own computing power to crack its own password, which is kind of cool if you think about it, in a bad for security way. Now, the length of time that it takes to crack the password will vary depending on how complex the password is. If you're just using a 4-digit PIN, which is no longer recommended by Apple anyway, it's broken in just a few minutes. And if it's a longer, 6-digit or a custom length passcode, it might not be available until several days later.
Several days or several days. There was actually a guy at Johns Hopkins did the math on this recently. I dug it up out of an episode of macOS Can. He said that a device like GrayKey could break a 4-digit passcode in about 6.5 minutes on average. 6 digits would take about 11 hours. 8 digits would take about 46 days. And nobody wants to put in a 10-digit code, but here's why you might. A 10-digit code would take about 4,629 days on average.
How many years is that?
It's like 3. I'm kidding. It's many more than that. I don't know. I didn't do the math, but 365 days in a year. So times 10 would be 3,600. And then add another 1,000 days. So that's another 3 years. So I've already forgotten. Is that 13?
That's crazy.
So right now, as we're talking about this, everybody's going, well, maybe I should change my 4-digit passcode now. Maybe I want it to take longer than 6.5 minutes to crack.
Here's the weird thing, though. So so assuming that GrayKey, and we're going to get more into, I hate using the word philosophical, but we'll get more into the philosophical stuff around GrayKey in a minute. Here really is the question. If we're talking about, okay, only law enforcement is going to have this, and law enforcement is going to hold you while they try to crack into your phone, I don't know. Do you want to be there for 6.5 minutes or 4,629 days?
That's one way to think about it, yeah.
There are lots of questions that I have around GrayKey just from a societal or philosophical standpoint, as I say. But we've got other technical stuff to get through first.
Well, just one thing first. When you're saying that, nobody wants to enter a 10-digit passcode.
Yeah.
With the advent of Face ID and Touch ID previously, I mean, they work pretty well for unlocking the phone. It might take a couple tries to get in with Face ID or Touch ID, but you really, you only need to enter your passcode if you're rebooting the device or if you manage to lock yourself out of it. Maybe it's not that bad of an idea to switch to a longer passcode just because you don't have to enter it that often if you have a newer model phone with Touch ID or Face ID on it.
That's an interesting idea. That hadn't occurred to me because I was thinking of it as an either or thing. Like either I'm using Touch ID or I'm putting in my passcode, or I'm using Face ID or putting in my passcode. But you're right. If my phone has been taken away from me and somebody's plugging it into something else, they're obviously not using my face nor my finger. And so that's still going to take them forever.
I know. And even when you die, they may try to, go to your coffin and use your fingerprint to try to get into your phone, but with that 10-digit passcode right there, that could help keep your text messages private.
This again is where this gets weird, though, because I sort of feel like, I feel like we're talking to the drug lords out there. I mean, most people, well, again, we'll get to the philosophical bits or the societal bits in a bit.
So, going back to GrayKey and GrayShift, they claim that they can access devices disabled through Find My iPhone with this method too. So, again, whatever flaw they're using, whatever security hole, that's pretty bad. So once the software completes doing whatever it's doing on the iPhone will display a black screen with the cracked passcode and some diagnostic information. So after you plug it in, leave it plugged in for a few minutes, unplug it, let the phone sit for a day or 50 days or 13 years, it will basically spit out its own passcode. And users can then reconnect the iPhone to GrayKey to perform a complete dump of all of the information on the device. So that's making a forensic copy of the actual device, which is necessary for, when you're saying this hasn't been tampered with, if it's evidence in court, they need to actually make a forensic copy of the exact information. And with the web app, GrayKey users can then begin to forensically examine everything about the device, from the info in its keychain to the data in the phone's file system itself. Now, some users have speculated that GrayShift has figured out a way to interact with the iPhone's secure enclave to bypass the time limit lockouts and other features that are supposed to make the iPhone resistant to brute force attacks. But again, it's all speculation. We don't know for sure.
Part of me wonders whether Apple knows, but I don't know if they would be able to say unless they have a fix, or if it's hardware based, like something with the secure enclave. I don't know. We don't know what Apple knows about it at this point. I guess the question I do have is, do we have any idea what Apple is doing about GrayKey?
Well, they haven't said anything about it publicly, nothing about the device, the company that makes it, or the flaws that make it possible. They probably haven't identified the exact flaw GrayShift uses to execute the exploit. Either that or the fix may be especially complicated. Without knowing what the actual issue is, it's hard to speculate and even harder to patch. But it seems like a sure bet that Apple has a team or some teams working on breaking it down. In the meantime, Apple has taken an interim step designed to make breaking into phones harder once they're out of the owner's control. Starting with iOS 11.3, the Lightning port is automatically disabled if a full 7 days pass between a valid authentication and unlock, so either by Touch ID or passcode. In other words, if the police don't get to testing a device within a week after it was last used, even hooking it up to the GrayKey won't do anything.
Okay, now that was actually a surprising bit of news when that came out, because, well, again, theoretically, GrayKey is only in the hands of law enforcement. And so I'm not sure who Apple put this in iOS for. I mean, did they put it in so that if GrayKey falls into the wrong hands? But then the thing is, okay, so let's say a criminal has a GrayKey. Chances are they're not going to steal your phone, then wait 8 days to get into your phone, right? But if law enforcement arrests you and wants to get into your phone, chances are they're not going to wait 8 days either. I mean, I'm having a hard time figuring out what the 7-day thing is about.
Yeah, I'm assuming it would be something like that for GrayKey or a similar device. I don't know. I don't know for sure.
I can't see why, though. Yeah, I mean, unless it's because you will have people like the AD from New York, Cyrus Vance, saying we're sitting on 700 phones. Well, they're probably not updating all those phones, though, so iOS 11.3 isn't going to help them anyway. And then also it feels like if you're just doing this to thwart law enforcement, that's really just sticking a finger in the eye, of law enforcement, which I don't think is Apple's thing. I know, like, you know, the FBI and certain police forces around the country, at least, maybe around the world, across the country and maybe around the world, have said what Apple is doing is really terrible and they're flouting the law. I don't think that's actually what they're doing. But let me back up a little bit further and ask, like, when it comes to GrayKey, when it comes to this specific device, what do you guys think?
It's interesting. I mean, I when we kind of discussed this a little bit before the show, but I think we're all in agreement that it's a better alternative than, you know, a government law stating that Apple has to be giving a backdoor to them. I mean, we've seen it before. It's hard to trust the government with keeping some data secure like that. I mean, it just takes one bad actor to get in there, and, you know, the CIA tools were leaked. That was one guy. You know, it's so I think I would rather have, you know, no backdoor, but something like GrayKey exist. And that, you know, the fact that Apple hasn't commented on that publicly, I mean, and this Lightning port thing aside, you know, maybe Apple would rather be in the position of doing a cat and mouse game with a company like GrayShift than with, you know, dealing with a government issued mandated backdoor.
And companies like this have been around for as long as I could remember. The sort of forensic type tools, they often will take advantage of some sort of exploits within the system. I mean, it's totally a cat and mouse game. And a lot of these forensic companies and tool sets, they really do try to limit who they give access to. But, you know, it could be easy enough to set up whatever type of company or spoof an email address or heck, set up an email address within some sort of law enforcement agency or group once you have access to, you know, their servers, and get something delivered.
Or pay a cop $10,000. Yeah. I'm sorry, if you're a bad guy who's been trying to get one of these things and you can't for some reason, but you know a cop who's on the take, or you know a cop who needs money, or you know a secretary who works for the police department that needs money. I mean, sneaking into some place and stealing this thing might not be the hardest thing in the world. At the same time, I mean, I just like you said, Mr. Toczek, I feel so much better about this because, I mean, it strikes me as the natural order of things in a way. Like, Apple has come up with security. Somebody has now come up with a way to beat that security. Because there's no law saying we have to have a backdoor, Apple is now free and probably working feverishly on trying to figure out how GrayKey works and stop it from working in the next round of phones or what have you. Because, I mean, yes, maybe good guys have this thing right now, but you're just one good guy gone bad away from bad guys having this thing.
And now there's also one thing to note is that even if Apple figures out, and I'm sure they will eventually at some point, they'll figure out what GrayKey is using to jailbreak the phone, unless it's something like on a physical hardware chip level that would require a new hardware to fix, which we've seen happen before. They'll fix the, say it's a jailbreak that doesn't involve hardware flaw. They'll fix the jailbreak. There's no way that this is the only 0-day that GrayShift has. I mean, you don't build a company and start selling $15,000 and $30,000 devices to law enforcement where it might be made ineffective and not work at all with the next update from Apple. They will have more 0 days that they would then be able to, plug into the GrayKey devices and use that one to jailbreak the iPhone. Guarantee that. Are
you 100% certain on that, though? Because the reason we know about the 7-day lockout for the Lightning port is because GrayShift sent out a message to all of its customers saying, hey, by the way, if you're going to plug this thing in, plug it in fast, because after 7 days, it won't work anymore.
And I'm saying that's a little different, though, because that's Apple physically disabling a port. It's just physically disabling the access to the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess you could look at that one way or the other as to whether or not the flaw that GrayShift is leveraging. I guess that's true. Maybe it is a hardware flaw that if they're actually taking that step of disabling the Lightning port. I guess, again, this is all, we don't know. We're all guessing here, but it's interesting.
But even this one method, they're probably researching additional methods and playing with the latest betas, looking for new holes, new things that they could take advantage of. And then think about it from the people who do this sort of, bug finding. If they happen to find something good, they could reach out to GrayShift folks and say, hey, I have this exploit right here. You may be interested in it. Here's how much I'll sell it to you for, which is probably going to be a lot higher than the normal bug bounty program offered by Apple themselves.
Do you think the one from Apple comes with lunch at Apple Park or something, though? Okay, we're only going to give you $10,000, but also stop by Apple Park and Tim Cook will wave to you as he passes by the cafeteria.
Build some brand loyalty.
That's a great idea. But GrayShift will actually take you to dinner. So it's completely... There are lots of things to consider when you're considering where to sell your vulnerability. There's actually a lot more, and I'm joking about that. There's a lot of serious stuff around this story. And if you would like to know more about it, because, as is always the way, we've really just scratched the surface here. There's a website that you can go to, though, to fall down the rabbit hole of links and clicks and all kinds of stuff. It is SecureMac.com/checklist. There you'll find links to this show, episode 88, as well as the episodes that have come before and the ones that'll come after. SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.